I've got some good news for a change. We have a major victory in our lawsuit against the cancel culture mob. I think we found a way, at least in Canada and probably in the United Kingdom and Australia, to use the law to stop deplatforming. It took 18 months, but I think it's really working. We've proven the concept. Let me show you the results and let me tell you how we did it and how you might be able to also. I have in my hand a signed apology from the owner of 2 theaters in Alberta that canceled 2 book signings I had scheduled back in October of 2019 for my book about Justin Trudeau called The Lebranos, What the Media Won't Tell You About Justin Trudeau's Corruption. As you can imagine, the book was very well received. It hit #1 on the Amazon.ca bestseller list. It has more than 1,000 positive reviews. So I was scheduled to do a book launch in Edmonton and then in Calgary at these great independent movie theaters that I knew when I was a student in Alberta. One in Calgary where I grew up called the Plaza Theater, and its sister theater in Edmonton called the Princess. I got to know that theater when I went to law school up in Edmonton. So I knew these 2 theaters personally. I love them. I actually had rented them out before to host a movie premiere a few years ago with Rebel News. Totally sold out events, by the way, very well received. The staff and the owner of the theaters liked it. It sold a lot of popcorn for them. So I signed a contract with these 2 theaters to do my book signings there for the Lebranos. And I paid the whole rental fee in advance, and I was pretty excited about it. We sold a lot of tickets. But then about a week before my book launch, a left-wing Twitter mob started threatening the theater owner. The mob wanted to cancel my book signing. So I called up the theater owner to reassure him. I told him I'd even hire some private security at my own expense just to make sure there was no problem and to put him at ease. But really, it's Alberta. A book criticizing Justin Trudeau really isn't a radical idea. This was just a woke Twitter mob. The owner, Mike Brar, told me in 30 years he had never canceled a movie, and he didn't expect to start now. The thing is, there wasn't Twitter or Facebook in the 80s or 90s, so this theater owner, Mike Brar, really didn't know how a mob would feel, what it would look like. And as the online mob got wilder and wilder, Mike Brar felt like he was in a tornado. I talked to him on the phone, and he told me he couldn't even sleep at night. He said he felt he had to cancel. I implored him not to. But finally, when the day of the book signing came and we all showed up at the theater in Edmonton, well, the doors were locked on us and we were kept out. So I did my book launch on the street outside. Here's a moment of what that mayhem looked like. My name's Ezra Levant. I'm the Rebel Commander at rebelnews.com.
Yay.
And welcome to my book launch of The Lebranos. Now the thing is, we were supposed to have the book launch inside the theater. But as you can see, we are outside the theater. Now this isn't supposed to be that way because I have in my hand here a contract with the theater owner, and I also have proof of payment on my credit card. So why am I outside instead of inside? Same thing happened in both Edmonton and Calgary. By the way, there was just a single protester at each event. One guy. I'm not kidding. And we had hundreds of eager book buyers. Well, fast forward to today. Let me read this letter to you, which you can find on the website stopdeplatforming.com. You can read it for yourself. But let me just read it to you now. I feel great about getting this. It's called Apology. I, Mackin Brar, of Edmonton, Alberta, am the owner and operator of Historic Princess Theatres, Inc. Rebel News Network Limited had scheduled 2 book launch events for October 10th, 2019 at the Princess Theatre in Edmonton and October 15, 2019 at the Plaza Theatre in Calgary. I made the decision to cancel those events at the last minute due to pressure from my staff and because of the specter of large community protests. In particular, 2 employees, Michael Corliss and Jordan Thompson, told me that Rebel News was not welcome on White Avenue in Edmonton and that they had faced problems at other events. In fact, Rebel News had held events at my theaters in the past without incident, and I should not have canceled these events. Doing so caused financial damage to Rebel News and damage to Rebel News' reputation. I apologize to Rebel News and its owner, Ezra Levant, for canceling the events and for any damage suffered. Mike Brar. Mike, apology accepted. I really think he means it. I just don't think he had ever been threatened that way by the mob. You know how cruel people can be on the internet. Leftists know that that kind of threats wouldn't work on me, so they picked on an immigrant entrepreneur and scared him to death. What a bunch of bullies they were. But back to October of 2019, the mob won. I was canceled. Seriously, who does that? Who bans a book talk? If you don't like my book, ignore it or rebut it, or if you're in town, come and ask me a tough question about it. Remember, the book banners hadn't even read my book yet. We had just published it. This was the launch. What was so gross is that some of the mob were professors and staff at the University of Alberta. How awful is that? Professors banning book launches. That's disgraceful, frankly. But like I say, what could I do? The doors were actually locked. My contract with the theaters were not honored. Now, as you can sort of tell, I sued Mike Brar and the two theaters for breach of contract. I had paid him in advance. He took my money and then he scuppered the whole evening. I don't like it, but I can understand it. And I really do accept his apology and the other parts of the settlement that I'm not at liberty to discuss. But what about the real bad guys here, the mob itself? You heard Mike's apology. Even his own staff, Michael Corliss and Jordan Thompson, they pressured him to rip up his contract with me. Do they really get to walk away from this? Does the Twitter mob? Do those woke professors? No. And this is the lesson I want to share with you today. This is how I fought back. See, it's sort of an obvious move to sue for breach of contract when someone breaches their contract with you. So that's Mike Brar and the Princess Theaters. But even though he was the one who actually canceled the event, it was the mob who forced him to do it, who abused him, who threatened him, who pressured him, who scared him. Metaphorically, they had a gun to his head, and nothing I could say or do could make him feel safe, even the private security I hired. They did this to him. And this is the new legal strategy that we used. And I don't know if it's been used anywhere before to fight cancel culture. We sued individual members of the Twitter mob and the email mob and the Facebook mob and everyone else who threatened Mike Brar where we could find their real name. We sued them for inducing a breach of contract. That's what's called a tort in law. That comes from the French word for wrong. Well, let me tell you a little bit about this tort called inducing a breach of contract. Back in the year 1853, this gorgeous theater hired an opera singer named Johanna Wagner to sing for them exclusively for a 3-month run. Apparently, she was very popular. Well, the guy who ran this rival theater in London in 1853 induced her to breach her contract to the first guy and sing at his theater instead. So he paid her to rip up her first contract and then come to sing for him. So the first theater owner sued the second guy who induced the opera singer to break her contract. And here's what that old-time court had to say about 170 years ago. It's a little bit archaic English. It must now be considered clear law that a person who wrongfully and maliciously, or, which is the same thing, with notice, interrupts the relation subsisting between master and servant, commits a wrongful act for which he is responsible at law. Now, that's slightly archaic wording, but it means that if two people have a contract and you induce one of those people to break the contract and run away, you're on the hook too, buddy. So Mike Brar did the right thing in the end, apologizing, settling, appreciate it. My lingering regret truly is that the theaters look like they've been crushed by the COVID lockdown. That's too bad. You know, I'd still like to do that book signing. I'd still like to see movies at those theaters. I'm glad to have settled with Mike Brar. He was a victim in a way too. But now we proceed against the mob. They induced him to breach the contract. You heard his apology and explanation. Now we continue. As you can see, Mike even told us the name of his staff who pressured him. We're going to add their names to the lawsuit too. And we're going to continue until justice is done. We are proceeding to court. Inducing a breach of contract is a tort in the United Kingdom, it's a tort in Canada, and it's probably a tort in other jurisdictions too. And I think it is the right way to fight back against the cancel culture mob. Let those University of Alberta professors and staff come to the court and explain to the judge why they pressured a theater into canceling a book signing. Let them come to court and explain themselves. If their own conscience wasn't enough for them to respect freedom of speech and freedom of the press and freedom of association and assembly and the sanctity of a contract, well, then maybe they need to hear it from a judge. If you want to see our lawsuit for yourself, it's on that same website, stopdeplatforming.com, that I put Mike's apology. I put Mike's apology there. You can read it. And if you are deplatformed somewhere, feel free to use my lawyer's lawsuit as a template. The mob carried the day back in October of 2019. But I don't think they're going to carry the day in a court of law. Go to stopdeplatforming.com to learn more. And if you can help me cover the costs of pursuing this litigation, please do. You can do it right there on the same website too. 18 months ago, a theater canceled 2 of my book signings. I have an apology from the theater owner, and we're going to keep suing the Twitter mob. Go to stopdeplatforming.com to see these documents for yourself and to help us fight cancel culture.